Now, there are parts of this that some of you have heard before, but they're few and far between, and just bear with me. I got an email from my father, which was odd. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, since my honeymoon. I suppose I'll have to tell you about that. If you've read the first book, you know part of this, but there's a lot more to it this time around. Long ago, when we lived in Ireland, and that was me, my parents, and my brother brought one of his friends around, Rebecca, this girl from Belfast. She looked rather like a potato, and not just because of her shape, but all the freckles. Now, freckles are fine, I think, and looking like a potato is fine too if you have that inner beauty that shines through. But this girl was an evil bitch, so in this case it wasn't fine. She tried to hook up with me, but I didn't like her, so she got revenge on me for rejecting her by seducing my father. Now, normally, when middle-aged millionaires leave their wives for someone half their age, it's usually some hot chick. It tears the family apart, sure, but you can understand. There's a precedent, thousands of years old. But who runs off with an obese, obnoxious, pathological liar? I mean, really? Anyways, they ran off together to Sardinia and got pregnant. Because my dad was still married to my mom, he asked my brother to marry the mistress so the baby would not be born illegitimate. Yeah, their kid would grow up knowing his own father as the father of his mother's husband, and despite my dad's angry condemnation of that movie Green Card because of its moral turpitude, he used this awful marriage to get a green card for the potato. Keep in mind, this is the strict disciplinarian who always insisted on doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. My brother was bribed to do it, handsomely, with promises that were never kept, like a nice car and a nicer apartment, and his condition was that the wedding be kept a deep, dark secret, and the apartment he could never, ever come to. My father. And Dad agreed, then publicized it all over their city. He invited everyone they knew, even the dockmaster of the marina, and embarrassed my brother. The Sardinians were very happy for the young couple, and then horrified to see my dad walking around holding hands with the bride all over town. He lost the respect of everyone they knew, and now blames his lack of friends on the treachery and fickleness of inferior people. Not his fault. Oh no, not at all. Now, my younger brother stopped talking to them for a long time, because that lovely apartment our dad got him back in Palm Beach, Florida, Dad and the potatoes showed up one day and moved in against my brother's wishes. They caused a lot of problems at that building, drove my brother nuts, ruined his reputation there, and got him evicted by impersonating him on the phone with the management. Then they sold the car they'd bought for him right out from under his nose. Right afterwards, Dad came to visit me here in Guatemala with my older brother to see my first extravaganza art show. He was nice enough at first, right up until the second day. I'd forgotten to tell them about the plumbing situation where you can't flush toilet paper because the sewers are made of clay and ruptured in earthquakes. They have jagged cracks for paper to get stuck on and build up, ruining the plumbing for an entire city. I've always disliked putting used paper in the wastebasket, but it's what you have to do, so I got over it. Dad said no through his teeth, with that look in his eyes that I used to dread. Like he was about to smack the shit out of me. Sorry? I will. He was furious. Dad, I know it's unpleasant, but it's necessary. I don't care if they have to wipe their asses with banana leaves, he said. Yeah, he really said that. Dad, I'm one of them, you know. I won't do it, and you for telling me to. So we were off to a great start. Girlfriend and I spent a lot of that day showing them around, and Dad made fun of me in front of her and my brother the whole time, calling me stupid, telling stories about what a whore I was, that kind of thing. When it was time to get ready for the show we'd organized, I was there at 6, setting up. We had a lot of paintings from a lot of different artists that I'd met, some sculpture, belly dancing, and live music, all kinds of stuff. I'd gotten Fernando to come and bring a huge coffee machine that looked like a trolley car, and that was how we became friends. Anyway, I had told Dad and my brother that the show would start at 7 sharp. At 10 till, I popped around the corner to buy cigarettes to try and hide my nervousness, and while coming back, saw him walking off towards Central Park, his back to me. Figured he was just taking a stroll or something. Anyway, show started. I was up there with a few town officials, and I gave my speech in Spanish in front of hundreds of people about how we were all here to start the Central American Renaissance, and I kept an eye out for my dad and brother the whole time. I never saw them. Then we had belly dancing, some of my wife's friends from Nueva Acropolis. It was a great show they put on. Then a poetry recital by one of the locals. Then live music from a local band. Still, no family. It felt just like that kindergarten play all over again, and I felt like a lonely kid. Finally, the whole presentation was over, and there were a bunch of people still there looking at art and buying some of the paintings, and then they walked in. Turns out they were in a bar somewhere. "Why weren't you here? I told you it started at 7. "These things never start on time," Dad said. "What things? My shows? How would you know if this is the first? I'm running it, so of course it started on time." "Ha! Like you've ever done anything on time. Besides, it's still in full swing, so what's the problem?" "You missed the entire thing." He looked around at the paintings. I still see a bunch of crap, and I'd be real surprised if you sold any of it." "I'm talking about the presentation. And I have sold a few paintings already, Dad." "Huh. No accounting for taste, I guess." I left him at that, and went off to schmooze. We all went to a bar afterwards, my girlfriend and her sisters and friends, and a few of the performers and my dad and brother. My dad told me how stupid my show was, how bad my art was, and I was a moron for trying to do this shit instead of getting a real job. To be more specific about why my art was crap, there was a painting I'd done of Judith from the Old Testament, with the head of Holofernes dangling from one fist and an Assyrian sword gripped in the other. He said it made no sense because Salome did not kill John the Baptist. Why would she have a sword? And why such a weird-looking sword? And why'd she look nervous? She had nothing to be worried about. I told him it wasn't Salome, it was Judith. The sword was an Assyrian sword, typical of the era, and she was nervous because she was in the enemy's camp in the general's tent with the head of the general she just killed to avenge the death of her husband. While she was doing God's work, I imagined she'd be a bit nervous, so I painted her with that expression. "Nobody's going to know that's Judith, though," he said. "Everybody else did." "Everybody who?" "All the guests at tonight's show. They all recognized her." "Well, the rest of the world won't know." My dad likes to refer to himself as the rest of the world. Then he said all my other paintings were crap because they were wall art. I asked what that meant, since every painting was meant to be hung on a wall. He said I was being an idiot. When he heard my girlfriend and I were talking about the possibility of opening a restaurant, he quoted an acquaintance of his who had one in Palm Beach, who told him to never go into the restaurant business. That was enough for him. Plus, I didn't know shit about cooking, and God forbid I ever try and feed anybody. Remember that time the toaster caught fire when I was 4 years old? I couldn't even make toast. The whole time, he would say what he wanted, and then wait a moment to see if I would reply. Whenever I mustered up the courage to say something back, he'd let me get out the first syllable and then interrupt me, making me look like a chump in front of a lot of people. Those other people then decided to call it a night and ask for separate checks. "Don't worry about it," Dad said, surprising them all. "I'll take care of it." "Thanks," said one of my future sisters-in-law. "But No, I've got it." And he handed the waiter his credit card, looked back at me with that evil face and said, "I think you were about to say something?" "You're being very rude," I said quietly, doing a turtle. "Rude? Your friends don't seem to think I'm rude, paying for all their drinks. Who the do you think you are?" The visit went downhill from there. My older brother, Todd, tried to make excuses for our dad. He always does that, trying to explain why he said this or did something that seemed wrong because he was unfailingly loyal. And it made sense, and I always felt like I'd been a shitty son and got what was coming to me. It wasn't his fault. He was still under that asshole's spell. So far, only our younger brother had been able to truly break free of it. So that was 4 years ago, before my wedding, 6 years ago in all, and I'd proven myself in the art and restaurant businesses, and Dad wasn't too happy about having been wrong. So it must have been a fluke. There was no accounting for taste, after all. Now, out of the blue, he was writing to tell me that Natty Bumpo, he called all of us Natty Bumpo, if I know why, but this time he meant my younger brother, had finally gotten off his lazy, ungrateful ass and signed the divorce papers they'd sent forever ago. And now, at last, the two lovebirds could get married because my parents had finally untied the knot too, and they invited me and my wife to their wedding in Ireland. I hadn't talked to them because Dad's wedding present to me and my wife had been to pay for our honeymoon in Italy, where they lived. Sounds great, right? What problem could there possibly be? Dad knew I didn't have any money. Having a restaurant is not the way to make your fortune. There's an old joke. Want to know how you make $1 million in the restaurant business? Start with $2 million. So, Dad said he'd fly us over there and we could start the tour of Italy and Sardinia at their house. Then we'd fly to Venice, tour Tuscany a bit, and meet up with them in Rome for the second half of the trip. It was so he could take us out to lunch and dinner, pay for things so we could save our money. That's what he said. He would pay for our meals and cover our hotels. Everything. That's great, huh? What could possibly go wrong? I told my wife, no, let's not do this. We travel with them, they will ruin our honeymoon. You don't know these people. They offer to pay for things so that you'll be in their debt. Then they'll treat you like shit in public, and if you get mad, they throw back in your face all the things they've done for you. Oh, you sure didn't think I was an asshole a minute ago when I paid for your dinner. We discussed it for a while and finally decided that yes, it was worth it. If my dad didn't pay for it, we'd never get to see Italy. It's just too expensive, and we are in Quetzales where we'd be spending euros. We would have a great time and everything would be fabulous. I'd get to show my wife all my favorite places in Italy. About this time, my dad decided that his mother had gotten dementia and couldn't live on her own anymore. She was still in control of my late grandfather's money, which Dad had been spending without investing, and it seemed like he was running low. So Dad sold her house on Palm Beach Island, had all her nice furniture and her art shipped to Sardinia, and moved her into his own home. You know, to take care of her, like a good son. She'd been there for a whole week when we'd arrived, and she was miserable. First off, she didn't have dementia. Rebecca the potato was treating her like shit whenever Dad wasn't around and lying to him right in front of us about all of these horribly vulgar things she said in his absence. Things she didn't ever say. About her calling their now 4-year-old son a bastard, about calling the poor mistress a whore, about her refusing to eat the lunch that was never really prepared. I watched that kid punch his grandmother and shout at her, shouting all the same things that Rebecca said, learning from her example. When Dad got in from wherever he'd been, or whatever he'd been doing, we just sat around the dining table and watched Fox News and drank coffee after coffee after coffee for hours. It felt a lot like jail. Also, Rebecca shrank almost all of our clothes in the dryer, all of it except for what we were wearing that day. Maybe she did it on purpose, maybe she didn't. Didn't matter. We would have nothing but one outfit to wear every day for the rest of our trip. We knew we couldn't say anything, so we just grit our teeth and accepted it. She also stole my wife's wedding ring. That we had to mention. She had taken it off of the nightstand in our room, and when we asked about it at lunch, she said we ought to check from the foot of our bed, the right side, between the mattress and the bed spring. Missing things had a mysterious habit of appearing there, she said. Right. Sure. Of course, we found it there, but when she asked later, we told her we had not. You know, to see what she'd say, since it was obvious she'd put it there herself. You should have seen her face. She was so mad that we'd found it and lied about it. But how would she have known I'd lied about it if she hadn't lied? Then I knew, from the look in her malevolent, pig-like eyes, she'd do something worse to us later. My wife and I played with the boy, 1, because we like children, and 2, because nobody else would. His parents just ignored him, let him run around like a maniac until they finally remembered to scream, "No!" They didn't even feed the poor kid breakfast. The most he would get was a yogurt at 11 in the morning, an hour before going into town to eat, because Bex would die before she cooked anything. They never combed his unruly hair or taught him anything except, "No!" Something that alarmed us was that he got very serious on our last day in Sardinia. He came up to my wife and me to tell us that he hated himself. We were shocked and asked why. "Because I'm stupid," he said, "and hideous." Now, where did a 4-year-old boy learn the word hideous? "Why do you say that?" I asked him, worried. I have stupid hair and an ugly body, and I'm stupid. My wife and I looked at each other, wondering what to do. He wasn't our kid, so she said we had to pray for him and feel sorry for him, but not do anything. It just wasn't our place. My nature, in my interfering vigilante nature, had to stand down, stay out of it, no matter how worried I was about the monster this kid, my half-brother, would grow into if left unchecked. It was our honeymoon, and we were there to have a good time. So, Dad slipped me €1,000 to kick around on the first leg of our honeymoon, and it was great. We had a blast. I got to track down all these restaurants from magazine pages I'd torn out and saved while in prison. Places I didn't get to go to when I'd gone with my family, because what I wanted to do was never important enough for us to do. It was amazing. We were in Venice for a week, Florence for another week, and took a day trip all around Tuscany to Siena, San Gimignano, where we tried the ice cream shop that won the world championship for gelato, and Pisa. We came back with a bunch of ideas how to improve our own restaurant and ice cream shop. Funny thing, I studied Italian for 4 years, and whenever I tried to speak it to a waiter, to anyone, they looked at me as if I was speaking gibberish. My wife spoke to them in Spanish, they answered in Italian, and they understood each other perfectly. Then we arrived in Rome, where we met up with Dad and the potato. They told us what they'd done to my grandmother, told me a pack of lies about how she'd gotten worse after we'd left, complained about this, that, and the other thing, talked a bunch of shit about my mom and brother, and generally just brought our mood down. From Rebecca's urging, my dad sent my poor grandmother back to Florida to live out her last days in a nursing home instead of in her house, where she'd expected to die, with none of her stuff. All that nice stuff they'd shipped over, it was now furnishing my dad's house. Rebecca had gotten all my grandmother's nice things, then got rid of the burden of having her around. One by one, she was getting rid of us all. Mom, my younger brother, my grandma, all my cousins by telling my dad that they'd stolen some of the things out of the house before it was sold. Dad was the only one not in the room when our grandmother told them to take whatever they wanted. With her permission and her blessing, they'd taken some tablecloths and placemats, some glassware, and the china. And Bex told my dad they'd stolen it when no one was looking. Another thing, Rebecca took her shopping for clothes and bought her tons of things that she didn't want with Dad's credit card while we were in Sardinia. We saw it happen a few times. Really spoiled her. Now Bex was wearing all those clothes. We tried to forget it. We had dinner in the Piazza Navona, and I got to have real tartufo in the restaurant that had invented it back in 1946, Tre Scalini. Jesus, it was good. The next day, we got in a rental car and drove to Naples. Dad was the same horrible driver he'd always been, making my wife and me carsick and shouting at every car that entered our lane. Didn't matter that they were 3 car lengths ahead of us, they were assholes, and Rebecca just pandered to him. Perfect example. When we merged onto the highway, she said, "Well, that was kind of a shit on-ramp." He nodded gravely. They criticized even the on-ramp. They yelled at every car near us, especially the Toyotas, because only idiots drive Toyotas, see? Wife and I passed the time by playing with the kid, and he really pissed off his parents by calling me Daddy and my wife Mommy and telling us that we were his only friends. I got worried and told him, no, I was just his brother. Half-brother, but who says that to a kid? And he said, no, you're my daddy. Both his parents were quiet all the rest of the way after that. We arrived in Naples, got a ferry to Ischia out in the bay, where my grandmother was born, and while I was helping my dad with the luggage, the women went to check into our hotel. Rebecca thought that since my wife didn't understand Italian, she thought, she and Dad could get the honeymoon suite with the spectacular view and leave us the room with the shitty view of the tagliatelle of power lines. But, like I said about the waiters, my wife understood every word. Man, she was pissed. But hey, it's all right. We were in Italy for free. We knew this was going to happen from the get-go. From that day on, our honeymoon was uncomfortable. Even though my father had said the whole point of joining us was so he could pay for our meals, the two of them made sure to show us how unwelcome we were at their table. Even though they called us to go at every restaurant, they treated us like we were a burden to them. I even caught them outside a few times, standing a little ways off, talking about us. I didn't have to hear their words, only let them see that I saw them, and they both shut up and looked casually away at that moment. It was so transparent that I was embarrassed for them. Come on ahead, you're more than welcome.
I didn't understand if he was talking for business or reading.
So we started going off for meals on our own, trying to be romantic and take the pressure off of them, which they hated even more. So we spent even less time with them, and on their last day, when I was asking my father about the return tickets to Guatemala, he smiled that shit-eating grin he was famous for and said, there weren't any. He had never gotten them, knowing he was going to leave us stranded in Italy from day one, without enough money to buy our own tickets home. And he'd been nice as can be the whole time, knowing in the back of his mind what he'd say the moment the question came up. I told you I'd get you here. I never said anything about getting you back. That's your problem. Ask your mother. That was the last time I've seen of him for 2 years. We wrote to my mother and asked her to help us out, and she paid for our tickets and had us come visit her and tell the story 6 times, then repeat it for my younger brother when he came by to visit. And eventually, we made it home. I swore I'd never talk to my father again. And now, here he was inviting me to his wedding. So, it looks like my story's going to have a wicked stepmother.